Robert Mills, architect of public buildings. Robert Mills was the first American-born and trained architect. He called himself Robert Mills, architect of public buildings. Indeed, Mills established a new scale and standard for public buildings in Washington, D.C. when he designed the Treasury Building, the Patent Office, and the General Post Office in the 1830s and 1840s, and the Washington Monument in the later years of his life in the 1850s. Our first American architect lived during the formative years of the United States' new democracy. During his lifetime, Americans were really thinking through what this new democracy was and how it should work. No one had done this American democracy before, and no one had built a grand federal city in America on this scale. Before the British burned the first incarnation of Washington during the War of 1812, federal offices were more on a residential scale and built of brick. Robert Mills lived and worked when we had a chance to make a grand statement about what our government was and the design of our new capital city. He believed that his building should be representative of the new republic, so he often used the Greek style in his architectural designs. Those designs were of monumentally scaled buildings built of stone. Noted Mills scholar John Bryan stated, "Robert Mills helped establish the image of the American government." But before this man helped shape our built environment, his childhood environment helped to shape him. He was a South Carolina boy through and through. Reared in Charleston by his Scottish immigrant father and his old South Carolina stock mother, he grew up amidst grand architecture by the American standard of his times. He enjoyed sailing among the Charleston Barrier Islands and undoubtedly soaked in the experience of growing up in a busy international seaport. He was apparently exposed to architectural training in Charleston during his adolescence, for he produced architectural drawings prior to working in Washington under James Hoban, the Irish-born architect of the White House in 1799 or 1800. Mills was befriended by gentleman architect President Thomas Jefferson and was given access to his library at Monticello, which contained many architectural books of the day. He later worked under Benjamin Henry Latrobe, surveyor of public buildings for Washington. Robert Mills was on the way to becoming the first American formally trained architect. Before he designed the grand buildings for the federal Capitol, Mills made important contributions to the architecture of South Carolina and other states along the eastern seaboard. Here, in this state, from 1820 until 1829, he served as superintendent of public buildings and later consulted on South Carolina's public buildings and internal improvements. His works in Camden are notable and beloved by our citizenry. He designed Bethesda Presbyterian Church, built between 1821 and 1823. The DeKalb Monument in front of Bethesda is his design as well. We suspect, but have not yet been able to prove, that he designed the two orphan school buildings that once stood next to Bethesda, the first clock tower, built between 1822 and 1825, as well as the jail, which was built in 1833. We know for certain that he designed and built this building, Camden's beloved Robert Mills Courthouse, the third courthouse built in Camden. This courthouse was constructed between 1825 and 1830. Mills wrote in his 1826 Statistics of South Carolina, "An elegant courthouse is now building here, which will be superior in its design to any in the state. The original Mills building had a grand portico supported by 6 Ionic columns." He wrote of the main entry, "A double flight of stairs rises within the vestibule to the courthouse story. His description of the second-floor courtroom stated, "4 columns rise in this courtroom, carrying their impost, between which brings a grand arched ceiling, the whole width of the room, and extending the entire length. You are seated in that courtroom, and by now you likely have an idea that Mill's original design was altered." In 1845, a petition of the grand jury for Camden District outlined their issues with the design of the 15-year-old building and their wishes for a redesign, where possible. The General Assembly granted their wish and provided funding for a renovation of the building. One of Robert Mill's chief concerns in the design of his architecture was constructing a fireproof structure to protect public records. Originally, the floor in this courtroom was made of brick liners. The wooden flooring you stand on was a result of those 1845 renovations. The arched ceiling in the courtroom, designed to facilitate good acoustics, was replaced by the flat ceiling you see now. The double stairway in the vestibule was replaced by the imposing and terrifying single staircase on the front of the building. The Ionic columns were replaced by 4 massive Doric columns now supporting the portico. Even the frieze around the cornice of the building was altered. The building was lengthened, and the roofline altered. The hallmark of Robert Mill's design remains, however. On the ground floor, the massive arched masonry construction of the offices, as well as the 21-inch thick exterior walls, remain. And, to Mill's credit, this building did not burn in the massive fire of 1829, which destroyed the town of Camden below York Street. Even with all the changes, we love and admire this building. Through all of its incarnations, it has become a beloved landmark in Camden. It has a long history with us. Robert Mills designed these walls and the arched ground floor to be strong and last through the generations, and they have. He left his mark on this structure, and through time, so have we.